Hi everybody, Mature Simmer here. So welcome to another episode in the Non-Aviator Flight Sim series. We just took off from the airport behind us there. Let me level out here a little bit. And we are over here in Dover, Delaware. Just a random selection to some degree. So I've gotten the plane up, and basically I have gone ahead and gotten things flying at a level rate. So I'm going to explain in this episode very briefly trim. So if you remember, we talked about the trim tab that sits on the elevator of the plane, and we talked about that in the How Does a Plane Fly and How Do You Control It episode, which I'll go ahead and link to up here if you haven't done that. And we're talking about things in this series from the standpoint of someone like me who's out here doing flight simulation, or you're interested in doing it maybe, and you don't have the background of a pilot, and you're like, what do I do? So if we come out here, we're going to see if we can make this work, the camera. But basically, it's not gonna let me quite see what I need to see. But along this surface here, that's the trim tab that we're dealing with on the back of this piece, which is the elevator. So let's get back in the plane. It's a little quieter. When you're flying, you know, you've got a couple instruments you're looking at. This basically is, the one that says, are you flying level? So you can see basically as long as your wings are there, and then you can tell I'm turning. I mean, obviously if you're watching the horizon, and that's just the inertia from the propeller. It just tends to make the plane want to do things. And then you've got your altimeter, which is the height. Again, I talk about these things a little bit more in detail, and how they work in the flight videos and so forth, so you can go back and look at those. And then the key one we're looking at here is this vertical speed indicator, and you can tell that's what it is because it says vertical speed. Not everything is labeled, this is the turn coordinator and so forth, but you can basically tell where you're at with your plane that way. And so when this is pointing at 0, that basically means we're flying level. That is actually what you really want to do. And honestly, I don't know that I've trimmed out an aircraft this well in a long time. But I've been flying in Cessna 152s in the Neofly series, and I think those are notoriously difficult, more difficult than this Piper Comanche, to get things set. So, as it is with a aircraft such as this one, where you don't necessarily, you have an autopilot to some degree, but you may not be using it and so forth. Once you're going, especially if you're going for any length of time, you don't want to keep pulling on the yoke and constantly doing all of that. So the way you avoid doing that, once you're at your altitude that you want to fly at, and again, we're rising a bit. You can see we've gone up 200 feet. So when I say I trimmed, didn't quite trim where I needed to. So I've got my trim mapped to control on my controller, and basically similar to the yoke, when you push, you will make the plane go down or descend. If you pull, you'll make the plane rise or climb. And so the trim is basically doing some of that and then avoiding you having to put ongoing pressure on the yoke. So I went ahead and pushed forward again, which basically will put the nose down. And what you're doing when you're trimming the aircraft is you're trying to get as close to 0 and as little movement as you can on your altimeter. So again, you can see, we are still slightly rising, so I'm going to put one more down level of trim in. But basically the way you set the plane is you want to use your control and get yourself to 0 and kind of try to hold it there and then release it, and based on what the plane is doing, you're either going to give some trim down or some trim up depending on what you want the plane to do. So again, I'm going to go 2 points in on the trim here. We'll see if that helps. We're now going down, and what you'll find is, so like now I'm going to try to pull up a little bit on the yoke just to get myself closer to 0 and see if it will, how it will hold it, because otherwise the plane will kind of do, I guess, what I'd call a roller coaster type move, where it's just up and down and up and down. So it's a little bit like a spring. You know, you're generating acceleration as you dive, then the plane starts to level out, but because you have more acceleration, you're suddenly climbing with the configuration of the controls of the airplane, and so it can start to kind of oscillate up and down. So you want to avoid that, but the goal is to just make it easier for you as a pilot, that you're not having to constantly either push down or pull up on the control. And you can see we're in a better spot here where we're staying relatively close to 1,300 feet. You know, again, it's, see, but now we're going back down. So you're never going to be perfect. Usually you need to be on autopilot, and an autopilot that has some VNAV or vertical navigation control to be a lot closer to perfect. But even that, if you watch an airliner as you fly it or anything like that, it's going to have all kinds of movement depending on the air and so forth. But the goal is that you're not pulling and pushing on the yoke, and it just allows you as a pilot to relax a little bit, where all I need to do is, you know, I need to sit and turn the yoke a little bit to keep the plane on the heading I want. But beyond that, you know, I'm not having to push and pull, which is more physical effort than turning. And that's the goal of trimming an aircraft. You're just getting it to fly straight and level. So if you're ever hearing that, you're with someone, you know, you're talking to a pilot friend of yours, and, you know, they're watching you with your newfound flight sim hobby, and they're like, why aren't you trimming the aircraft? What are you doing? Well, your trim's off, whatever. You know, you start hearing that trim word. Now you know what it means, and now you know what your goal is. So if you've got any questions, comments down below, always happy to respond and talk to folks. So drop them down there, and I'll do my best to answer them. But again, what I'm hoping to do here is give you enough information in small enough chunks that you can consume it as a non-aviator and start to enjoy this flight sim hobby as much as I do. If you've enjoyed this video and haven't dropped a like, please consider doing that. And if you are not a subscriber to the channel yet, please consider doing that, and I will see you next time.